and certainly provided some profound reflection that hopefully we'll get a chance to really exchange for this evening. This is a significant time. We as women in this country mean something more than perhaps we have meant in I don't know how long. The civil rights era itself spoke to so much of our power that all too often we give away, and we underestimate and we undervalue, and yet again our imposition in our nation, where we will probably be the deciding factor in the leadership of this country. Where our country goes will rest on what we do as women, and particularly us women of color, for our power and our influence, for our own homes and even partners that we share. There is enormous power that sits in this room alone, that if all of us did something with it, we can change our country with what we do from our home. So being here tonight to really speak to women in the civil rights movement and what that really means in this America, what that meant then, what that means now, and what that's going to mean is really what this is about. So joining us tonight on our panel, we have Mary Tyner, who is a civil rights activist from Americus, Georgia, who was active in the desegregation campaigns. She'll speak to us tonight in her experiences in the trenches in Georgia during the rights movement. To her left is Commonwealth Attorney for the state of Georgia. She'll be here tonight to speak about the current legal battles being fought in civil rights today. Then to her left is Cameron Bell, civil rights scholar, class of 2016.
Hey, congrats.
Okay. From Princeton University, and I did not stutter. She will speak as a millennial about civil rights movement and the impacts on us today and for our future. And to my immediate left, and thank you so much for this night, is Delegate Marcia Price, House of Delegates, 95th District, who will be speaking to us about the legislative battles in Virginia and what we can do about it. So we are taking a walk just on this panel alone from our past and into our future. It was completely designed that way. The way that we walk through the experience upstairs is the way that we're going to walk through the experience down here on this panel. So we will start, ladies, and I will start first with you, Mary Tyner. And we have a question for you, and as I pose it to her, you know that it's a question that we would like each of you to respond to. Oh, yes. Okay. I apologize for that. See, I'm so excited about the conversation. I skipped right over opening statements. Into the conversation we go. So let me pause for a second and give you guys a chance to get to know who you are spending the evening with themselves. So, Mary, will you go first, please, and share with us a little bit about you?
Well, I think the first thing I'll say is my children have a tendency to call me Mama. But then when they talk about me as Mary Kate Fish Bell Tyner. So that's my name. I was born and raised in Americus, Georgia, and attended school there. I matriculated at Spelman for a year, and my mom passed away. I was without college for 2 years. So the college at home became a senior college, which was Georgia Southwestern College. And I applied there. It took me 3 semesters to get there because they would not admit me, even though there were black students going. So finally I had to go out, and as was all my materials there, finally they said yes. I said, then what's the problem? And the man looked at me and said, are you that Mary Bell? And you'll know after I talked to him, and I said, do you mean that, Mary Bell? He said, you're different from what I thought. I said, but that's not the issue. The issue is I need to go to college. I've got to go to college. I've got to get this education, and I want to go here. And he said, well, I'll get in touch. I said, you've been saying that. I said, if you don't get in touch with me by next week, because it's 2 weeks before school starts, I said, I'll be back with my lawyer. On that Monday, I got a letter that said, dear Mary, welcome to Georgia Southwestern.
Come on.
And so I was one of the first blacks to graduate from that, even though I was a junior when I went. I did 2 years in a year and 3 months, graduated from Southwestern with a degree in biology and a minor in
Good job, yes.
Hey, everybody. Stephanie Morales, and as she said, I'm a Commonwealth attorney for the city of Portsmouth, chief law enforcement officer for my city. I was elected last year, February 2015, to become attorney in my city at 31 years old. As you can imagine, there were a lot of challenges that were associated with being a young color holding a position that continues to date. About 3 months into taking office in April, I had an officer-involved shooting in my city, where an officer shot and killed an unarmed African-American teen. We just in July had that trial, and the officer was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. So one of the first times that we're seeing around the country, in recent times, where we're actually getting a conviction. So something very relevant to the conversation that we're having now about civil rights and equal application of the law for everybody. I had that happen within 3 months of taking office. So I would just say that, it's very important who we have in office, and I'm here tonight to make sure that we discuss some of the issues that I face. Aside from the actual position, I'm a native of Portsmouth, Virginia, graduated from Northam High, Norfolk State for undergraduate, William & Mary for law school, and I have 4 children. So I don't just approach this as an attorney and as a working professional, but as a mother who has 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, who are part of our community and who are going to face all of the same issues that many of us face.
Good evening. My name is Cameron Bell. I'm a product of Newport News Public Schools with class of 2012. I've been in class of 2016, so just graduated. I majored in history and minored in African American studies, so I'm going to take a minute and brag on my grandmother for a second. She's cut over a lot of stuff. So I need to talk about the future, but we're going to go back for a little bit. So I wrote my senior thesis about her, so I have a lot of that, but I grew up listening to her stories of what she had done in the civil rights movement. She was the first African-American woman to run for office in her town, in Americus, Georgia. Americus is a very, very small town. It's the county seat, though, of Sumter County, so it was, pretty important, but it's rural. There's a lot of farming communities out there. It's in the southwestern region of Georgia, so that picture of Leesburg that we saw, the girls in the stockade, that's right up the road. To just kind of give you a gauge of what it was like. And she integrated the polling places, so the day she was elected, it had 3 lines: men, women, and colored. And colored was out back. So she's poll watching because she's on the ballot with 5 other men, by the way, so it's a whole different conversation. And she notices that that's that line. She says, we're not going back there. So she stands in the line for women. And of course, that caused some problems. And she got up to vote, and the clerk looks up and says, why are you here? She says, well, I'm here to vote. And the woman looks at her and goes, well, this line is for women. She goes, well, I am a woman. And the clerk says, well, this is for white women. And she didn't know it at the time, but 4 of her other women with her in the movement as well were in line with her. They had come up behind her, and they all stood there and refused to leave. The sheriff came up, and they said, you gotta go, you gotta go. She said, no, we're gonna vote. It's our right. We have the right to vote. We will not leave. So they were arrested for quote unquote, I forgot what charge they came up with. I think blocking the polling place or disturbing the PM. Some charge that we know had no holding. Put in prison, and they were in jail for 10 days. The bill was $1,000.
Wow.
They refused to pay on principle. The White Businessmen's Association in the town had gotten together to say, okay, we'll pay the bill, because outside of them being in jail, people were protesting. People were boycotting. People weren't shopping downtown. They said, you have these women in jail for no reason. They want to vote. And so the businessmen were getting scared. Mind you, before all this had happened, my grandmother had been
Y'all hear that, right?
had been
They boycotted them businesses.
a lot of work.
Hit
And
them
they took these
pockets.
businessmen to the table to say,
You
look,
can make some action
we
happen.
want the same things, hopefully, right? Equality. You want to keep your business going. Well, you have a majority black population that's going to shop at your stores. So y'all need to come talk to us about how you're going to make things better. How you're going to hire black people, not just in service roles. How you're going to be a point of change in the community. They didn't want to come to the table. They had a whole lot to say about, oh, this and that, and they just didn't want to hear it. But now that these women are in jail and people aren't shopping, we're boycotting, and all of a sudden they want to turn around and say, oh, we'll pay your bail. So she and the other woman wrote this beautiful letter, which I have a copy of, so if you want to talk to you later, we can read over it. And they denied that bail and said, we will stay in jail until this is rectified. So after getting out,
Principal.
They sued the county, and it went all the way to federal court. And due to the Voting Rights Act, which had just been passed in '65, they ended the desegregated polling places. So this, it took some time with litigation, I think. So about 2 years later, they had a re-election, and she came in second place. So the guy won, he still won, but the point was they ended segregated polling places. So sorry, I went on a whole like. So yeah.
Sorry.
Is that what motivated you?
Oh, absolutely. Forget I was going to say. The whole thing. So I grew up listening to that story over and over and over again. And I just was fascinated by it. I said, Grandma, tell me when you got. I call her grandmère. She likes French, so grandmère. I say, tell me about that time you got shot at. Tell me about that time you were in the civil rights movement. 'Cause I just was so fascinated by that history, especially given how it's taught in schools, right? We don't really get the full picture. We get 2 or 3 named people with Parks, Malcolm X, Dr. King, and that's it. And I knew there was more because my grandmother's right there. We're in the kitchen cooking, and she's telling me, yeah, they tapped my phone, and I would do this, and walking down the street, and they were shooting, and we did this, and we would take tally of the Klan member would work, we would go to businesses, and I knew there was more. I got to college.
To note who didn't support the community and didn't support the business. Pay attention.
Took the time to write about it.
Economic boycotts. It works.
That's why I'm so excited for this exhibit, because women get overlooked all the time, and especially Black women. Last to be seen, last to be heard, and history just hasn't been told. And to think about how we're moving forward, seeing the ways in which the movements at hand now, Black Lives Matter is founded by 3 Black women. A lot of the on-the-ground work, we have women in positions of power, right, and attorneys and delegates and senators and, First Lady, like, women are in more spaces of power now than they ever were before, and so now these stories won't get lost, right? Like, I can imagine, I want to be a teacher, so teaching history maybe in 10 or 20 years, teaching about Black Lives Matter, teaching about whatever happens before, and thinking, oh yeah, there's these 3 Black women who did that, whereas before I didn't get that in school. And so that, for me, is very exciting to think about where we're going. As far as how do we teach this, how do we remember this, but also how do we rectify, all these issues of equality, because during her time, right, it was segregation that was very blatant, very plain, in your face, black, white, you can't go here. Now we're dealing with implicit bias. And people say, oh, I'm not racist, but, we're dealing with institutional racism, systemic ways in which these things are being practiced, and seeing that we're not fully human and we don't deserve equal treatment. And that's a different battle in and of itself, to be more creative in our ways to try to fight back, but it's exciting. Anyways, I think probably over time.
What's so valuable? Yes. And we will come back to many of the things that you actually said. So we appreciate it. Thank you. Marcia, please.
So I'm going to fly through mine because I could talk. But I just wanted to say, to touch base on the rich historical importance of what we've heard and why this event today was so important for me. Again, thanking Michael Bellucci and Alex Mann and Ben for his help as well this evening. While we are here in the room, and as Cameron was speaking, I heard someone say that it's not Jim Crow anymore. It's James Crow Esquire. And it's not a pickup truck, he's another here. And it really is true when I'm looking at these photos and these emotions that are rising. It's not for naught. It's because I'm part of the historical continuum where the struggle is still continuing. So I just wanted to touch on that just a little bit. Let's see. Sorry, I have a lot to say. But so one of the things when we're talking about current civil rights struggles within legislation, right? So I just want to raise that there's some that aren't like super easy, that aren't like, they're kind of complicated. They're, the implicit bias or the institutional, but there's some that are just like straight up right or wrong, right? And so for an example, for me, it is really important to raise that though we have equality in Virginia through a Supreme Court decision, you can go get married, have a wonderful wedding, and then come back to work and put up a picture of your spouse and be fired on the spot with little to no legal recourse, right? So when we're talking about discrimination and the things like to really recognize the parallel tracks with some of the other things that other groups or those of us in our racial groups that are going through, really seeing the similarities. And for me, what's really disturbing is how when in the civil rights movement, the Black church was the location of the start of the fight for equality. But now Black pulpits are being pimped by other organizations against the fight for equality for other people. And so we just have to be really careful. And I promised my mother that I wouldn't get to straight up preaching, but one of the things that I have touched on before is that when Jesus said feed the 5,000, he didn't ask who you love, how you love. He didn't ask where you went to school. He didn't ask, anything about your social economic. There was no VIP session. He told them to feed the people, and they all were fed. And so what I'm trying to do in my role is to make sure all are fed, right? And that starts really with an equal application of the law. That's important to me. We also have a current attack on the families, on working families. So I want to give a shout out to my VA Block team. Virginia Block is in the building.
He's the Block.
I have been doing community organizing in one way, shape, or form for a very long time. But now, with the help of New Virginia Majority, we're able to do it in an organized and sustained fashion such that we are out in Hampton and Newport News in ways that young people have not been organized before, right? So we're doing voter registration, voter education. We've hit 1,600 people in a month and a half. Tell them about what it is.
Y'all heard the number, right? 1,600.
We got to count for them for a couple weeks because we were so excited. But they've already given you information about voting, and if you know every single thing on that page, then it's your job to give that page to someone else. But one of the other things so the attack on working families looked a lot like the Union March that we saw in one of the photos right after Martin Luther King had been killed for the sanitation workers, right? So the idea of collective bargaining, being able to fight against dangerous or ridiculous, just unhelpful and unhealthy constraints in a workplace, that is being attacked today on your ballot on November 8th. And so please read up on ballot initiative number 1. So when I say that there's this continuum, they have the words now that look a little bit more like, this legalese, when it really, they could have just put up there, we want to shut down the unions. Why not just say that, right? But I was on the committee that was outvoted when I said that if we have the average reading level in Virginia between 6th and 8th grade, but you have an SAT GRE comprehension question up there for an amendment. Historically, the Constitution has been used to grant more rights. But within the last decade, we're trying to use the Constitution to take rights away. And that is a problem. That is a problem, a civil rights problem. I want to talk real quickly about the solidarity. I want us to, as women and as Black women, not to feel like we have to apologize when we refuse to pick between our gender and our race and our activism. And this has reared its ugly head for me in the conversations about Birth of a Nation, right? So however you feel about the movie, that's your feel, right? But there are victims of sexual assault within the African American female community who said, you know what? I don't like how the national conversation is going. I don't like how victims are being denigrated just so we can uphold the executive director of this movie. I'm going to sit it out. And then their solidarity with racial justice comes into question because they don't want to see a movie that we're finding doesn't have a lot of historical value anyway. It was more for entertainment purposes. And honestly, I don't know that a gang rape is something that I want to see for entertainment value. So being able to stand by each other, that if you want to see a movie, I'm cool with that. If I don't, be cool with that. If Amber Rose wants to do a slut walk to be able to bring awareness to the fact that women and girls are being abused on college campuses. Instead of saying, "Ooh, she shouldn't be wearing that," maybe you should find a way to either join or have an alternative movement that is bringing that awareness as well, because the number of African American women that are being abused versus the number who are reported. And then I'm sure Stephanie can speak to, then go beyond the number who filed charges, and then go beyond the number who actually win a case against their abuser. We've got to learn how to stand together. So just like it was the picture of the Big Six, but somehow Dorothy Height just, was she not there? Can we call it the Big Seven? You know, can we really get to the point of we matter? So for me, Black Lives Matter. If you're not calling us to the table, then all lives don't matter until Black women's lives matter. And so we are part of that conversation. So I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to comprehensively discussing how we are mattering today. And one last thing, like she said, y'all, this urban crescent in Virginia is real. Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Hampton Roads have the opportunity to decide who is going to lead our nation. That's right. Who is going to lead our nation? You know what? I'm going to take an executive privilege. So, I'm sorry, y'all got me burnt up. No, because we're going to...
She rolling up the sleeves. She rolling up the sleeves.
Teenage girls in jail that were fighting for their rights, then it is incumbent upon me to continue to speak out. I have been in the field, and you know what I've been hearing? I'm not excited about the election. I'm not excited. As an elected official, it is not my job to excite you. It is my job to know what I'm doing and to make decisions that will positively impact your life.
Come on.
We got spoiled, y'all, in 2008 and
2012,
right?
yeah.
So we had all the nail you on, we had buttons, jackets. So we can't expect that every single elected official is going to get us that excited. And I think it's an unreasonable expectation. What we can expect is that those decisions that impact your everyday life are going to be made whether you show up November.
Come on. Preach. Preach.
So at any given time, you have more than 15 people who are representing you and
Count 'em.
making decisions about your life, your children's life. And for you to say that your voice doesn't matter or your vote doesn't matter, then you are allowing everyone else to pick those 15 people for you. And so just seeing what people went through, seeing the hoses being put on humans while they were just trying to exercise their right to vote. Come on, y'all. November 8th, 6 a.m., 7 p.m. I know y'all can find the time to get there.
Can we get a woosah? You know, it's so powerful to have these kind of conversations because just beneath the surface of our skin is our heart beating. And we're always asked as people of color to somehow let that thing beat a little quieter so it doesn't disturb the next person. So when we allow ourselves to collectively have that heartbeat, this passion rises to the surface. Because you've heard it many times, and, you know, for those of you who have read Soul on Ice, who have heard Eldridge Cleaver's work, and the list goes on, but to be Black and conscious in America is to live in a state of constant rage. It is hard to be woke and not have feelings
Come on.
that are flooding your body on a constant basis. And for those of us who are professionals, we have to figure out how to appropriately stuff it and package it in pretty Christmas paper.
That's true.
So as to not offend the receiver of the gift of our truth. So it is not easy to be thinking and conscious and to not be passionate in delivery about that. And what is scary for those of us who are passionate are those who are indifferent. We can't afford indifference because indifference will create a whole other passion and we will be the victims of that passion. There is a reason why this election looks the way that it does. It's because the ugly underbelly of America has been exposed that has less to do with party and more to do with hate. And we wanted to pretend it was about policy, but one side has no policy and yet has incredible passion. So there's no question about the fact that we will either be those who are exposing and utilizing our passion, or we will be on the receiving end of somebody else's passion, and you got to choose what side of passion you want to be on. So we have this conversation, we are walking from a past of passion that should not end because we are in a future that is going to require passion.
Yes.
So with that said, Ms. Hines, I want to ask you a question. Do you really see a difference between then and now?
I don't see a big difference. I'm sorry, I just don't see a big difference. I see where the strategists have taken on new names. I see where the people are coming out of the woodwork because they think it's okay now. When before they were looking through us when they talked to us, or whisper behind our backs. Now it's okay to come right on out and float it all across the world or whatever. I am just glad that I'm not as violent as I used to be. And I am a little bit more internal now. I can do things with words now that I couldn't do then because it was nothing for me to knock you right out and think nothing about it. But things have changed. The situations are the same, but taking care of the situation has not changed. The end result has not changed. The bullies have got to be more vocal because they think, well, it's okay. But my philosophy is, if you allow people to do things and continue to do it, and you don't say anything, they're going to say, oh, it's okay. They don't say anything, so I can keep on doing it.
Yes.
You confront them at every turn.
Head
If you
on.
say something I don't like, hey, whoa, let's take care of that right now. I take care of it, then I'm through with it. I'm not going to next week come out, well, you know, last week you said so and so. I don't have time for that. Last week I took care of that. I want to take care of what's coming up today. And right now, I feel that passion. I've always been political. I've always fought for the underdog. I've always been a little angry. And when things got rough, I didn't care. I didn't have to wait on anybody to tell me. I never tried to make anybody do what I did. I had my own way of doing things, and I would do it whether you did it or not. I took my chances. And like you said, the church was the focal point at that time. Now, I don't see where the church is taking that stand, and I believe that the church is the focal point of a community. The head of that church should be the focal point in that church to lead that community. Why is it that ministers don't say the things that need to be said? That's where it should be said, because you have a captive audience, and you need to tell these people. Black people have always relied on the church. It didn't have so much to do with religion per se, but it had to be done with training and talking and teaching. They're not doing that anymore. And many times they don't want you to do it either. And that bothers me, because I have a tendency to say things. I heard said so and so. I said it was true. I said it. People make sure that when you say things, when you open your mouth and regurgitate stuff, be able to take the consequences. Don't say something and say, oh, no, I didn't say that. They got the wrong idea. No, they didn't. They didn't get the wrong idea. Say what you mean and mean what you say. And if it's a fight, you say, look, you don't say that to me because I'll beat you up. I was telling somebody that there were two things that my mother taught me when I was growing up. She said, you don't let anybody kick you, and you don't let anybody spit on you. When I was marching with Martin Luther King around Davidson's, a lady came up, older little white lady, and she came up and she said, and you all, I can't call myself the N-word. There was no such thing as, hey, you N-word. They call me the nigga. Okay? So I didn't agree with it then. I don't agree with it now. It was ugly then. It's ugly now. And I would jump you every time. She told us we needed to be at home. You need to be home with manners and whatever. So we didn't pay any attention. Dr. King said, be quiet, don't talk, be nonviolent. And you know, to that side, I was just raised. I said, Lord, I handle this. And she made the mistake. She spit it was I took the sign off. I propped it on the building. My girlfriend took hers out, propped it on the building. She took the lady's legs, and I took her foot. Took her head, and we took her out there and dropped her in the gutter. We wiped our hands off, took our signs back on, and we kept on You have everything. Whatever God gives you, you take that. You use that to the max. And you'd be surprised at what you can do.
Thank you, Ms. Tyner.
He said that because I sued the city for discrimination. And they would not allow me to go to court. They said that I would damage the town. My girlfriend and I, the other young lady, they told us that we would damage our city. But the judge said that we were right, that law had been broken down in Albany, Georgia sometime before. It had already been said in Albany that there should be no segregated voting places. The man in America says, as long as these are my polls, no one's gonna vote here. So as long as you don't challenge anything, it stays on the book. So I said, you know what, this isn't right. So that was why I challenged it. And little by little I continue to tell you, but that was why I challenged it. And the result was, no more segregated voting in America's Georgia. They told them you either have to have white men or women, but you can no longer have white men, white women. You have men and women, or you can just have one voting booth. You cannot have these segregated things. So that's how we broke it down. Because, you have to challenge things.
That's right. Thank you. And to that end, Stephanie Morales, let me ask you, what do you think about the intersection between race and law? As someone who upholds the law and is responsible for the law, what do you think we need to understand about that unique intersection?
Well, the number one thing that people need to understand is that until we have representation among people who are in my position, then you don't have control over how it's applied. Traditionally, and what we're seeing as a country where people are very upset with the results that are coming out of officer involved in use of force cases, where there are no indictments, no true bills, people have ignored prosecutors' races so long that this profession literally went unchecked. You would be surprised that even with the state of things now, there's attention on prosecutors across the country. I went to a university and sat on a panel about use of force against unarmed black males, and I asked a room full of college students, some PhD students, some undergraduate students, even professors were in the room, and I have to believe that they were just they were a very lively audience, but I'm just going to choose to believe that they were being quiet at this particular point in time. But I said, does everybody know what a Commonwealth attorney is? And nobody responded. Now, I get this often when I speak to high schools and even, with younger kids, but there are a great deal of people who do not know what a Commonwealth attorney is, or what a district attorney or what a state's attorney does. They don't realize that this person is the chief law enforcement officer for their jurisdiction, not the chief of police, not the sheriff, but the elected prosecutor. They don't realize the great amount of power that this person has to basically decide what is going to be prosecuted and what's not. They get to decide who's going to get a break and who's not. They get to decide a lot of things, what plea agreements are going to be offered and what's not. What type of sentence is going to be recommended for a drug possession case and what's not. And so there's a great deal of power that goes along with that, and great deal of responsibility. But at the same time, there's another end of this. As the chief prosecutor, I'm also responsible for all the attorneys in my office. That means I handpick the attorneys who are going to prosecute these cases on a daily basis, which also means I'm responsible for making sure that they either reflect what the community looks like, or that they understand and respect and care about the needs of this community. And so it's so intricate, the amount of thought and the amount of power that is involved with this particular office when we talk about the intersection between race and how the law is applied. If you just think about who the players are, if you have traditionally a prosecutor who doesn't know anything about the community, they hire prosecutors who don't come from the community, then how do you think they feel about the citizens of the community? They don't see them as people, they see them as problems. And so, I could go on forever about the way this intersects, but if you think at a very basic level about the people who are involved, and the fact that if the community does not pay attention about who gets in office, we oftentimes will not have any type of control over the intersection between race and the law and whether it's applied equally or not.
Yeah, I have a question.
The Commonwealth Attorney Office is an elected position. That means that the average person, citizen, can run for that office and they don't have to be a lawyer?
No, you have to be an attorney. Yeah, you do have to be an attorney, but average citizens vote for that attorney. And so that means that you have to understand the role of that person and what that person is responsible for. And so when we had that officer shooting case, I really began to learn just how ignorant a lot of people were about the process itself of just evaluating a case, overseeing an investigation. Because believe it or not, you know, I caught flack not just from people who cared about police lives matter, but I caught flack from civic organizations that are supposed to be centered completely on the needs of the black community. Because something wasn't moving fast enough, now you got a problem. You know, and then I had somebody to come sit in my office and tell me they didn't know the name of my predecessor, and they didn't know anything about what happened, you know, when my predecessor was in office, even though there were these same type of officer-involved shootings. But they know my name, and so they're here and they challenge me and ask me, why isn't it moving fast enough, and why am I not divulging all the information? And people don't realize that if I were to divulge, you ask for things and don't know what you're asking for. I want complete transparency. Okay, well, guess what? If I had given complete transparency and turned all the information over, I would not have been successful during my trial. Period. I had a professor, you know, on a panel that I was sitting on to say, you know, if we want to see change, we need to make sure we get special prosecutors, and we need to do away with grand juries. And I said, do you know what you're asking for when you ask for these things? Because who has been elected to do certain things in your community? The person you put there. So if you turn around and ask for a special prosecutor, you've now asked somebody who has no ties to your community, doesn't owe your community anything, to come and do a service for your community. How do you think that's going to turn out? How have we seen turn out? And then do away with grand juries. Okay, well, do you know how the other process works? Do you realize that police officers take out charges, they're going to get warrants, and they have to swear out probable cause before a magistrate. Make a police officer go and swear out before a magistrate? No, you cannot, because they're under penalty of perjury if they would be false. So, well, I don't believe this police officer did anything wrong. I'm not going to be statement in front of the magistrate. You can't make them. So yes, we have issues, but the biggest thing we can do is make sure we get the right person for the job in place. If you think about reworking the system, you know what you're asking for, you'd be surprised at what you turn out with.
Right. Yeah. So, thoughts, questions, reflections, whatever it may be, is clearly heard, and it's respected in the process. So I saw a hand going up towards the back. You had a question?
I do, and this is something that I struggle with often. Hi, everybody, I'm Tiffany. One of the things that I noticed very early on in my children is a sense of inferiority. And I would speak, or what you all to speak to it in the room, to speak to that complex that we carry subliminally. We don't even recognize or realize that it's happening. How do we raise the next generation to know, love, and respect themselves in spite of the history that we try to put down their throats and shove them and take them here and there? We can take them to the, National Museum in D.C. We can take them to see Maggie Walker's house in Richmond. I mean, all of the things that you can try to teach them, but you still see their heads down, feeling shame and burden, and watching the television and seeing somebody who looks like them being shot. How do we reckon all that and build up the next generation so that they know that they are somebody and that their lives literally do matter? How do we do that? And X out the negative connotation. My son said to me when he was about 7 years old, why are all the people on TV being arrested black? And I said, oh, that's what they're showing you. So I want the panel.
Actually, we're going to defer to our psychologist, who happens to be our moderator tonight, to keep that off, and then we'll follow up.
So when I'm not here, I actually do parent education and leadership training all over. And one of the things that's incredibly important about the question that you asked is the role that we play as parents in the process, okay? And some ownership that we're going to have to take of a few things that we don't realize that we are participating in the crime, okay? You don't have to tell me, honestly, right this moment, but in this room alone, I could guess how many people have said, oh, she's adorable, she's got good hair. in the South, and we think it's appropriate to make comments like that. She's pretty, because she's light-skinned. He's cute, because he has light eyes. She's fine, because she looks just like so-and-so, you know, a little like her mama, Indian. We got so many people in this room who got Indian in their family, and I've never looked at their genealogy at all. True. And what's so interesting about that is we don't even realize our covert participation in the crime. We are telling our children that they are less than without even realizing that the first teacher you will ever have is your parent. Mm-hmm. So if we don't change what we're doing, it doesn't matter what society is doing. Mm-hmm. There is an impact that society has in terms of the normalization of all things. Psychology will talk about it, but for sake of time, I won't go into all of that. But the frequency in which you see anything determines what norms are. So if inside your household, the conversation that is had on a regular basis is about your greatness, then other people who are saying something different than that, you actually think they're crazy. Not you. Yeah. But it is a byproduct of how much a child hears. If we think in terms of negatives and positives, assume every negative to be worth $1 and every positive to only be worth $0.25. You need to do 4 positives for every negative you say to your child, because you're going to have to balance it out. And then on top of that, you're going to have to compensate for the fact that he and she are going to get messages outside of the home that are going to be making withdrawals to that account also. So you have to make enough deposits as a parent to offset your own withdrawals in addition to society's withdrawals, which means that the majority of our conversation needs to be uplifting with our children. So when our child screws up, we don't say, that was stupid. You are stupid. Your daddy, this, that, and the other, the list goes on and on. Instead, we have that same conversation from the perspective that you are too smart for that grade. You are too capable to have done A, B, C, and D. That decision that you made was less than your greatness, which is why I'm ticked off. Because I don't raise average. And when you behave as average, you have body snatched my child. So I need you to bring back
Say that all the
child,
time.
and to take this average one and drop him off.
Yeah. No mediocrity.
That conversation is sending very definitive messages to our children. And quite frankly, even to our black men. Because as we deal with their stuff too, and they come with stuff. But when we deal with their stuff too, we need to talk about their stuff in the same way that invites them to their personal greatness, as opposed to reminding them of all of their inadequacies. The world is going to remind them of that already. We don't need to have him come home and have that experience in his home. And as women, we don't need to do that to each other either. So you want to change what happens to our children, we need to change what's going on with our adults, because it begins there.
If there can be anything added to that, as someone that doesn't have any children, what I can say that I add to the conversation is being an alternative. Right? So if you think that X, Y, and Z in television is how to be a woman, I'm offering an alternative. Come take a look at politics. Come take a look at STEM. Come take a look at art. Come to the museum with me. Be a Made for More girl. You know, be one. Yeah, shout out. You know, work with organizations doing the work in the cities, like in the trenches. Be that alternative view to the negativity, so that we can add that positivity, and then we can create that village that is an alternative, even those of us that may not have children.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Question.
Do you think that we have fallen short on helping our community understand that the local elections are just as important?
We've been educating. I advocate for local.
I'm very sensitive to that because I'm from Kansas and I grew up back went to college in the 60s. My parents were very active in politics. I remember when the Koch brothers were buying the local elections back in Kansas. They now own the entire state at every level. And it really started at the local level because people paid no attention. No attention at all.
So what I envision to be a really good example of how everything matters is we showed up in 2008 in record numbers. We elected President Obama. But understanding how government works, President Obama could not get a lot of his agenda done because we stayed home in 2010, and then we end up with. Okay, so we're not partisan here. So we end up with other people who don't want anything that we want to happen, right? So that's just like next year, right? So everybody's talking about 2016. Next year, let me tell you what's going on next year, 2017. So go vote November 8th this year, 6 a.m., 7 p.m. 2017 in November, Virginia will choose its governor. Who the governor will be in this next election will be the governor when the census is done. And they will be the governor when redistricting is done. I don't care what your issue is in this room, whether it's education, women's rights, taxes, I don't know, whatever you care about. The basis of it right now is the top 5 elected in Virginia have all been of one party. But then when you look at where I go out of 100, we're only 34 strong of that same party. How does that happen? Crafted districts that re-elect incumbents that may not always have our best interests at heart, right? So independent and fair redistricting is how you get to the heart of that. But it happens with who you put in place when the redistricting is done. Then you can call my daddy. That's why no questions on that front. A mayor, if you have a city that has a city manager government style, the mayor is one vote. So we got all excited about voting for mayor. You gotta show up for the rest of the council too. He or she needs 4 votes to get anything done. So you're supportive of these initiatives, but then you don't show up in 2 years when the other people are being, and then school board has direct hands-on school policy. If you do not think that things are moving in the correct direction for your personal child's story, I ask, how many school board meetings have you attended? You can even sit home, sip guilty in your pajamas and watch them online or on TV. But how many of us are there? I don't even want y'all to raise your hands, but how many of y'all have been to Richmond to see me? To stand behind me? Okay, I saw y'all. So this group may not be the group. There are those of you in this room that have not been there, so when I'm up there and I'm like, rah, 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 my rah, rah, rah gets quieted if there's nobody behind me, echoing what it is that I'm saying. So all of it matters. All of it matters. And yes, we've dropped the ball. Because when we're out in the field and I hear somebody say my vote doesn't matter, or I'm not excited, or all of this, we haven't done our job. And it's not just about the pictures that we saw upstairs, it's about the future. It's about the generations unborn. The next president will choose possibly up to four Supreme Court justices who will have decisions that will impact generations that have not even been born yet. Thank you. You die out or you retire, right? So, yes, it's all important.
To that end, one of my concerns, one of the things I tend to say is you could always judge the health of an organization such as a church or even a YWCA, which is a club with, by looking at the age. Is there a lot of youth there? You can always judge the health of an organization based upon that. And so I'm concerned about the youth. How do we get the youth involved in this process? Because it just seems as though they really are. They don't see themselves as being important. They don't see the process as being important. They're more attuned to other things, The Walking Dead, or whatever the TV show is, whatever it is. But how do we get them engaged so that when you have the May Tyners or the Stephanie Moraleses or who are as passionate as they are, whose voices are no longer here, how do we get those
soldiers to come up and take their place, because we're not gonna be here eventually. You know, everybody in this room is not gonna be here at some point or another. So how do we get people, how do we get our children to rise up? How do we get our young daughters to come, rise up and take our place? What do we do? How do we do that?
Sure, I want to ask.
So I understand a lot of things. Some of my classmates and peers have been echoing they're not going to vote, they're not excited. Because we were spoiled. I had people say, well, my first election was 2012. So this, by comparison, is not, it's not a comparison. So it's, in one way to try to meet us where we are, and I think a lot of times, and probably some from personal experience, but there's also friends and colleagues I've spoken to about this, sometimes they feel as if someone from an older generation might be patronizing them, depending on the stance or the issue or what's going on. So I know, even in my work with the VA block sometimes, if someone says, oh, I'm not gonna vote, instead of going at them with this whole history of like, well, people died for this, and because that's what I could do, because to my grandmother and everything else, like, instead of hitting them over the head with why it's important to vote and, you know, people died for this and all that, because they're not really excited about that. History seems so distant to them. Saying, okay, well, why do you feel like your vote doesn't matter? Why do you, and trying to figure out where it is that they actually are in that space. So it kind of varies by person to person, right? It could be, okay, well, I just don't want to get out of bed, and that's a whole separate issue. Or, you know, it could be, well, I don't think anyone's gonna care about my particular issue, which is X, Y, or Z. And there could be a ton of reasons. And I think that's one way to start, is to kind of figure out what are our young people saying and really hearing them. They have things to say, they're paying attention. A lot of times people that I know who don't want to vote and don't want to get out, they know everything about the election. They know everything about both candidates' history. I mean, they're pulling out stuff that I didn't even heard of before. They have a whole lot of stuff. And I say, yeah, well, in school they don't teach you this. I looked this up on my own. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have Google. You know, it's very easy for us to find things out very, very quickly. So you're not reaching us in about 5 seconds. It's just not, it's not gonna work. And so I think it's about finding where people are, what that interest is, and finding that like moment, a point of entry for them, and then working from there to figure out what would be the best bet.
You and your grandmother are prime example of where we start. You know, when we drag our children to different things, events, and they see us engaged, I think the two of you are just prime examples, because you got inspired from your grandmother. You know, and I got inspired from my parents to the point when I was in college, Mary, I wasn't quite on your level yet, but my husband and I named our dog Revolution.
I like that.
Right here with us. And then the other part of it is, like in a lot of our organizations and maybe even church, some of us older people have got to move out of the way.
Yes.
We really have. We've got to move out of the way.
That's true.
And allow the young people to get in there without judging and criticizing, but working to support them. That's why we're so proud of you.
Can you say that one more time?
No, One more time.
Some of older people, we have got to move out of the way. Sometimes we want to hold on to the power and the position. We become obsolete and just worn out, and we're not doing any good when you've got young people lined up with, I mean, look at these beautiful women here, just lined up, ready to go. And so we've got to move out of the way without resentment and, you know, without going through, you know, changes that will look like you're not supporting them, and work to support them.
Let me stop you there, because and I see you, and I'm gonna respond to that and make sure that your question gets answered. But it's really, there's such value in what it is that you're saying, in that the only way for all of us, particularly as you age, to live forever is to invest yourself in someone else. Right. That is the only way that that's possible. And while you are holding on to your stuff for you, it dies with you. So it benefits the whole for you to begin to sow into fresh soil, so that another fresh harvest can be created, rather than your whole soil dying out and rotting.
Bring them out.
So that is, there's such value to what it is that you're saying. You had a question.
Yes. Hello, good evening, ladies. How are you doing? Hi, my name is Sparkle Williams, and currently a Portsmouth Public School dual education or dual enrollment teacher, and I teach government. and I also teach American Government at ODU and TCC Portsmouth. And when the verdict came down, I was telling my students about this, and actually one of my fiercely right-wing students brought up the current event. And in my head, behind my mask, I was like, thank you, Jesus. Finally, someone was convicted, and it's going to actually see time. There were a couple of questions that I heard, and like I had to think of a new question because y'all kept getting my questions. But I know for my children, I think you said drag them to different things. I do drag them to things. My daughter goes to a predominantly white private school, and you can't wear any kind of art on your shirt or anything like that. And one young man had, several of them wore pro-Trump shirts, and her first thing was like, "Ma, what can I wear?" And I said, "I will find you an anti-Trump shirt." And I said, "Baby, if you wear this shirt and I get a phone call, understand, I'll be right down there." And she knew that there could be consequences for her wearing that, but I was behind her in doing so. And additionally, my son was at Maury High School, and they took a knee after Colin Kaepernick. And I also explained to him, like, I need you to know why you're doing it and not just following blindly behind the coach who incited it or other people who just see him as the role model. I need you to know why you're doing it. Also, you might not be playing next week because you took a knee. They condemn you like that. When y'all talk about, getting the youth involved, actually for the Portsmouth Mayoral Forum, I brought about 20 of my students. And everyone 40 and over took notice because everyone was 50 or older. And they were like, why are all these young people here? Because they don't come to these kinds of things. Because no one's telling them about it. No one takes the time to take them out to it. And then I explained to them, like, do your parents come to these things? They're like, no. I was like, why? I was like, because you guys think when you become an adult, you have all this free time. I was like, what happens? You get relationships, you get jobs, several jobs, you're going to have kids, you're going to have pets, and you don't make it to school board and city council meetings, but those are the races that are coming up in your city right now. So one young man hadn't, he hadn't registered to vote by the initial deadline of October 17th, and it was extended this week. And I texted him and called him to make sure he registered, and he sheepishly said, yes, Ms. Williams, I did it after practice, I registered to vote. I was like, because this is your city, and if you don't try to change things in your city now, you're always looking back just for someone else to do it. And there are people in political parties or local, state, federal who are hoping that you don't come out and that you don't say things. They know who's going to come out over them, and they will continue to do that. People who continue to say they have no voice, they have no vote, will stay at home and they bet on that. So this is a way for you to make sure that you can adjust or shift change. And that's the only way I know how to do it, is to personally go to students. And I mean, I never wanted to be a teacher, God knows, because it was too hard. But I found myself doing it, was to actually just get their hands and be like, look, meet me here, and let's see what we can learn from this. Because a lot of them, like someone said, they're into all these other things, but so are adults. So they're only doing what we're all distracted. We're all doing 15 things at once. They see that, and then they check out. And they feel like Twitter is enough, being in the being in the Twitter sphere, being in some social media is enough, and it's not. And I'm like, and if you're not happy with one of the two basic parties, there are always third parties, and those third parties affect change and get people to change the platforms in the larger parties, or replaces the party that you are jaded with, that are no longer meeting your needs. So I just wanted to say those things.
Thank you for that. To that, we have, how many of you are parents in this room? The vast majority. And how many of you have contact with a young person if you are not a parent? Raise your hand. Just a little nugget. You have to be able to get past the threshold of discomfort with your youth. Part of the reason that we don't take them to things is because it ticks us off that they're bothered that they're here. So it's easier for us to just leave them home than to have to deal with that attitude. Because my night is ruined because your attitude is terrible. Okay? So it's just like fitness. If you can't go through the discomfort, you will never build the muscle. So true. We have to build the endurance to be able to walk our young people through the process so that they can get on the other side of the discomfort with the respect and appreciation for the process. But we've got to have the tolerance to take them through that process. I see you, but we have one.
This is actually the last question, so go for it, our future generation.
Okay.
The generation of now.
My question is, I'm not old enough to vote, but I still want to vote and be a part of it. I want to make a difference in the thing. So my question was, how do I do that?
What do you do?
So, before you leave,
Yeah, can you?
raise your hand.
Yeah, right here.
Of these wonderful community organizers. Because what you just said, when I come to the polls, that will touch me. You know what I'm saying? When we're making calls and somebody calls me and says, hey, look, I can't vote, but I need better schools. Can you please show up on November 8th? Do you know what that can do for someone who was thinking about maybe sleeping in or not showing up that day? We have plenty of work for you and any of your friends. But honestly, for anyone in the room, Virginia Block we're open and welcoming, and we're looking, check us out on Facebook, some of the things that we've been able to accomplish. Cameron's on the team too, in just a month and a half. But what we know is that I think the oldest one of us is still under 40. We know we don't know everything. So we're looking for an intergenerational effort, and all are welcome. We're working on 6 issues: education, women's rights, dismantling the pipeline and crime prevention, mental health, environmental justice, and economic justice. Something you love is in one of those.
The other thing I would like to say very quickly, there were so many nuggets that were shared this evening. We thank all of you parents for being part of the process. When Cameron was speaking and she was referencing her grandmother, one of the things that what her grandmother had said is that they wrote down who each of the KKK members were, so that they would not shop at their store.
Economic protest. That's what I didn't miss it.
What they were speaking
Thank you.
is the economic power
Yes.
of people of
Come
color.
on.
We do not understand that if any given day we decided that we are not playing around with
We'll
Walmart
shut this
anymore,
place
and
down.
speaking, tomorrow,
They were shut down.
whatever our issue was, would get fixed immediately. But what we lost in this generation, because progress is not always progress, okay? We might have progressed in time and space, but we have not progressed as a community. Because there was a time where we would inconvenience ourselves, and we would be willing to walk, and we'd be willing to be hot, and we'd be willing to be hungry, and we'd be willing to sacrifice our reputation, and our job, and our access, whatever it took to be able to move the needle for the community, because the whole was more important than the individual. But the problem that came with the poison of prosperity is that we are comfortable. So we don't do anything that makes us uncomfortable anymore. As a result, we have lost our power. The Bible actually says that one puts 1,000 to flight.
Come on. You better preach.
Because we are exponentially more powerful together than we will ever be apart. And what we have lost in these years as we come down this panel is our willingness to put aside our individual agendas for our collective.
Come on.
The minute we get woke to that,
Come on.
we are going to change our world.
Yes.
So when
Amen.
you decided to spend your night with us tonight, you decided you wanted to turn on your alarm clock. And it went off tonight. And what I hope is that when you leave here, you will not go back to sleep.
Woo! You gotta work. I'm gonna go home, pull out my flag.
You were talking about parenting. I don't mind telling you, I'm 75 years old. And there was not a book for me to learn to parent. One of the things that I still have a problem with is parents need to get out and see what the children are doing. You can't wait until little Johnny gets 15 years old and they say, okay, now we're going to do this and we're going to do this, or spank his tail. You should have spanked him. You should have spanked him when you were 15 days old.
She old school.
You can't grow them after they're already there.
That's true.
You make these rules and regulations at your house. So what if I was called Meanie Mama? I didn't care. I ran the house. We weren't buddies. We were not friends. I didn't wear your clothes. I didn't do this. You did what I said do, and I laid down the law. But I gave them choices. And we did a lot of talking. We started talking when they were 3 years old. When they were asking questions that they heard at school. I anticipated what they might hear at school. So they would come home and say, Mom, I heard so-and-so. I said, well, what did I tell you? Well, I told them I had already heard it. So I didn't have those problems. I was never too tired. Sometimes I was so tired I wanted to just lay down on the couch and go to sleep. But I was never too tired to answer questions. I was never too tired to talk.
Come on.
And I never let them know if they shocked me.
Yes.
I made it look like, oh, I already knew that something was going on. I said, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
But they never realized there were things they said that I'd never heard. So I would put a cap on that right then. There were curfews and all kinds of things. We have to kind of institute some of those things now. We have to start early. Because if you do that, they will respect you more. If you talk to them, my children could say anything to me they wanted if they knew how. But they had to tell me in a different way. They couldn't just jump out at me and say things because I knocked them out. but they knew, Mama, I need to talk. Or Mama, I heard something today that I had to talk about. I said, well, look, we'll sit in there at the counter and we'll talk. Sometimes we would talk to 3 o'clock in the morning. I listened to everybody and I told them things in real time, in true time. I called a spade spade. If there was a word that they weren't familiar with, I use that word. My daughter was telling me when I was talking, I said, Mama, do you have to use those terms? I said, those are the only terms to use. Those are the words I want to hear you say. I don't want you coming here with all these nicknames of things.
That's right.
You know, tell me the truth. So that's what you have to do. You got to start early, people, because these children are very, very smart in the crib. They know. So you talk to them, and don't talk to them in baby talk.
Nope.
Talk to them. Tell them how good they are. Tell them how pretty they are. Tell them how smart they are. And there are certain words we didn't use at home. We didn't use things like stupid. That was a bad word. If anybody said stupid, I said, what did you say? You don't call anybody that. I said, you're a smart girl. You're not a stupid girl. But we didn't use stupid. And then when I grew up, I couldn't even use the term ain't.
Yes.
So there was no such word as ain't.
Yes.
So it comes from that. And there's not a book to describe everything you're going to go through. You got to be creative.
Come on.
So I know I see more hands, but I do not like to get put out of places. But in the email that you received, if you register, there's a button at the bottom that says Get Updates from Delegate Price. If you join that, you'll get emails. We can sign you up, or you can sign yourselves up for Virginia Block. This conversation has got to continue, and we can invite more people, and we can come back, and there may be other exhibits, or wherever we meet. These conversations and these safe spaces have got to continue, and I 100% am committed to that. So just stay in touch with me, social media, all of that, it'll be out there. But thank you so much for your time and your attention, and drive safely. Thank you.